Hi everybody, my name is Hannah and this is Pepper and Pine. Welcome to this series where we're looking at kindergarten all the way through 8th grade. Today we are exploring 3rd grade and the 9-year-old child. I'm going to share some aspects of the classroom environment and the things that you might expect to see in a classroom, as well as some of the experiences we had in our homeschool with our 9-year-olds. I have 4 children. They are all beyond the 9-year change, but some of them went through the 9-year change a little bit more rough than others. And this is completely expected. Not every child is going to go through developmental changes the same. As my mother used to say, everyone goes through their terrible 2s or their terrific 2s, but it's not always when you're 2. So what is the 9-year change? What's going on? Why is it such a pivotal moment in early childhood? The 9-year change is a time where the child goes from the fantasy world, the imaginary world that they have lived in that they did not distinguish between fantasy and reality. And this is a time where you might have told your child about something that exists that doesn't exist. And while we chose not to do this, you might find in a Waldorf setting things like gnomes and fairies existing, or if you celebrate certain holidays, you might say that certain holiday characters exist when they don't exist. And at 9 years, 10 years is when the children are questioning whether those things are actually true. And they're coming to the realization that there aren't these figures, like that isn't true, that that was a world that they lived in prior to the 9-year change that they would believe without question, without hesitation. This is one area that I really differ with the Waldorf pedagogy, in that I would not tell my children things that were not true because they would believe it just for educational purposes. But there is a lot of that in the Waldorf environment where they may believe those things are true even as adults, or they would believe that a child can believe those things are true because they are or they've seen it. So a really simple example that I would not stand behind would be to tell a child like to not do something or to do something based on, in my opinion, a lie of there being a make-believe creature. Like say, make sure you don't climb that tree because in that tree there is the nest of a fairy and you don't want to disturb that fairy, so we're not going to climb that tree. Like I would never say that to my children. And sometimes teachers or parents may choose to say that to their children who are younger than 9 as a means to get them to do something that they want in a way that they can relate to and be cautious of because they don't want to disturb the fairy. Like they will believe that without a doubt. So that's where I differ, that I would not be saying those things to get my child to do or not do something. And I would not entertain those kinds of stories in an academic setting. And if a child asks like, oh, was there really a fairy outside my window, or is there really a pirate climbing up my window at night that I don't see? Like I would not entertain those things. And my children have been exposed to that with some people who would say like, oh, did you see that? And it wasn't true. Or something like outside their bedroom window at night, like, oh, make sure you're quiet at night because you don't want to disturb, like whatever it is. That's like, I partake in none of that completely. And I also have very strong opinions and criticisms against that. Just want to put that out there, that I absolutely don't believe in that. And I absolutely am very critical of people who use that to get children to do something or to avoid something. And I want to say that it's not unique to the Waldorf pedagogy. I remember one of my family members, when they lived in another country, being told, and we're Muslim, and so shaitan, like you can consider it like the devil, like don't go next to that trash can because the devil, shaitan, lives in it. And it really terrified my niece when she was told this. And when they're young, they believe it. And I think that was just a terrible thing, a very traumatic thing. And I would never support manipulating children that way, either to do something good based on something that's completely fictitious, or to avoid something bad that's completely fictitious, based on a story that's completely fictitious. So what is going on at 9 years old, and why all this talk about things that are untrue, or fairies or gnomes or shaitan living in the trash can? Like, what is going on? Prior to the 9-year change, children believe all of these stories. They believe them without hesitation. Even things that are fantastical in nature, like how could that possibly happen? How could you have like a superhero climb on the side of a building? Or how could you have something, a creature that doesn't exist, like exist? All of these things, like children will believe it without a doubt. Past the 9-year change, they don't believe those things just without a doubt, without hesitation. They are very critical of those things. And there may be some residual, like maybe 10, maybe a little bit 11, but for the most part, after the 9-year change, this world of fantasy that they lived in, and by fantasy, I mean that there wasn't a clear distinction between fantasy and reality. They just were not developmentally able to distinguish between the two. And you might say, no, I tell my 5-year-old, like, this is make-believe, this is pretend, you understand, right? And they'll say, yeah, of course, but cognitively, they simply can't. And so you will see that there is this remarkable change after the 9-year change where they are able to distinguish between these things. Because of that, they may experience sadness, grief, anxiety, an unsettling time. 9 is a very difficult time for many children, not all children. Each child will experience it uniquely. And for some children, the 5-year change is more dramatic than the 9-year change. Your puberty is more dramatic than all the other ones combined. Or those terrible 2s that your toddler went through was a bigger challenge than anything else that you went through. No matter what, your children and yourself, your siblings, everyone is going to go through these different developmental changes. And we're each going to have different developmental times that are more challenging than others. It's also important to realize that we go through these developmental changes all the way up until the very end of our life. And so you might find 40-year-olds going through their midlife crisis, and that's like this developmental stage that they've gone through, or the elderly being incredibly stubborn, because that's also the developmental stage that they're in. So we're all going through different developmental stages throughout our entire life, and some are more challenging than others, and sometimes we need a little bit more support as we're going through these. So the 9-year-old is going through this huge developmental shift that's going from this world of fantasy to this world of reality. Time suddenly speeds up, or really time finally is a quality of their existence, whereas before the 9-year change, time was not a limitation, was not a quality that they understood or could really process. So I'll give you an example from my own childhood. Pre-9-year change and post-9-year change. And I don't remember a lot of things, but I remember this in particular. I must have been in 1st grade, and I thought that summer vacation was as long as the school year, that they were both the equal amount of time. And as we know, summer vacation may be about 3 months or so, and the school year is about 9 months or so. And so I was experiencing them without the limitation of time. They both seemed equally eternal. After the 9-year change, I remember walking to school at the beginning of the school year versus the middle or the end of the school year and thinking, oh my gosh, that went by so fast. Like, I can't believe that went by so fast, because suddenly time had a presence in my life. And of course, as time moves forward, we are always thinking that it's just going faster and faster and faster. And so that is a quality of how we experience time pre and post the 9-year change. Another significant difference, especially noticed in the Waldorf curriculum, is that grammar is taught starting in grade 3 or at the age of 9. It is not taught before that, especially past tense, because a child doesn't have a past before the 9-year change. So it's not cognitively appropriate for you to be talking about a past tense, because it simply is not relevant for the child. So that grammar is saved for post 9-year change. And that means that also in foreign language and maybe even music, written work is brought in, whereas before that it was more oral or auditory. And so post 9-year change, you might find that you're doing written work in foreign language, or maybe in music, you're finally reading music rather than just learning by listening. I love the Waldorf curriculum and the pedagogy because it really understands this significant milestone in a child's life. It's probably one of the most significant out of all of the different developmental stages other than puberty that a child is going to experience in their young life. And because of this, the curriculum, the pedagogy itself supports that child's development with a few different things. It recognizes this unsettling time and this need for stability and calm by providing lessons that will support that child's abilities to feel secure and safe and calm. And it does this in a few different ways. The first way is in the stories it provides that are going to be the stories for the language arts, for instance. And so you know that in the previous years that every grade level has stories in order to bring the lessons for the main lesson block. So in grade 1, we had the stories of fairy tales in introducing the letters of the alphabet. In grade 2, we had the stories of the animal fables when we were working on sentence structure. And in grade 3, we had the stories of Prophet Musa alayhi salam or Moses and the time in the desert when they were wandering in the desert before finding a home. And when you have these stories that mirror the development of the child and the sentiments that the child is going through, they feel comforted in knowing that they are seen and validated for the way that they feel. So those stories are not religious necessarily, although for us they are religious, but they are profound stories with deep lessons that really resonate with the 9-year-old child. Other lessons that I find just revolutionary for grade 3 is the shelter building block, the clothing block, and the farming block. And all 3 of these blocks give students practical skills necessary to just survive and live life, and it's in a way that comforts the child in a time of instability. So when a child knows that they can build their own shelter, when they can sew or weave their own clothes, and they can farm and find their own food, it gives them the comfort that they need to get through this tumultuous time, which will come to an end. They will get through the 9-year change. There will be a calm that follows this tumultuous, pivotal time. But in the meantime, providing these lessons are not just practical lessons for the child, but they also provide a spiritual, emotional, and mental stability for that child. So in the dwellings block, and we didn't do this every year with my children, but I remember the first year we did it, we literally built a full-size shelter with I think there were pieces of like maybe 1x2 wood, and I think we even used dowels or screws. I don't remember, but we actually built an entire structure, and my son built it. It did end up teetering a little bit until it was reinforced, which was tumultuous in itself. It wasn't great to see all of that work go in, and it kind of like tilted and it almost broke. But once we got it reinforced, it was really amazing to see how quickly we could set up the framing for a structure. We also did some basic sewing, weaving, and other garment making skills. And we have always done a little bit of that throughout all of the years, but in grade 3, we especially focus on weaving. And what I love about the Waldorf curriculum is that all of the other subjects help support that student in their development. And so you're going to see those skills reflected in handwork, where you will see them doing weaving. And when you weave a large enough piece of cloth, then you can start to put it together to make a small garment. And if you have just plain fabric, you can also hand stitch a very simple garment. And so one year, and because we homeschool multiple kids, multiple ages, multiple main lesson blocks, there was one year that we were doing our ancient Greek and Roman main lesson block. And for our Rome main lesson block, we made tunics for the for like an army soldier. And we also made like armor as well. And you can find the link to those videos in the description box below in case you're interested. But it turned out that we were doing that at a time when I had a child who was in the second, third, fourth grade age range, as well as other children who were older, for that Roman block to be significant, but also the project that we did of creating this garment also worked really well for my younger student as well. Farming or planting a garden is something that we're always doing in our homeschool, but really dedicating that time in grade 3 to really give that nurturing for that child, that sense of like, I can plant a seed in the ground and I can see it come all the way to fruition and see the fruits of my labor literally, is really important for them to have that comfort and that feel of like, I can do this and I can feel safe and comforted in this process. The next lesson that I find to be just fantastic for grade 3. Grade 3 is one of my favorite years, truly, is that in math, we're doing measurement, time, and money. And these are all significant for the child. It makes sense. Time did not make sense before because they lived in eternal time. And now time is this quality that they can experience and understand. And so telling time is now significant for them. So now we're learning how to tell time. Measurement is also incredibly important because if you're going to be building a structure, you actually need the skills of measurement. And of course, money now, we're looking at decimals, which is not going to be worked on until grade 4, but you're getting the beginning of that in money and understanding money and doing simple addition, subtraction with money in bartering or buying and selling. You can see that you can the function of money, how to use money, and then also the way that money is constructed with a decimal and different place values. And this again makes sense for the child because they're looking for these basic skills to give them the comfort to get through this tumultuous time of the 9-year change. Some children may find that they have trouble sleeping. They might find that they have greater anxiety. And if you as a parent don't recognize that this is actually a developmental stage, it might be really alarming that your child like suddenly is having conflict with their friends, or they are having a higher level of anxiety, greater fear about the unknown. And while not all of my children experienced all of these developmental milestones the same, I do remember with one child who was already prone to nervousness and anxiety, the 9-year change was especially challenging. But here's the thing, post the 9-year change, that child was completely different. And post-puberty, that child blossomed entirely. These fears and they're still a little bit under the surface, but these grand fears that were so overwhelming and all-consuming to that child virtually disappeared with the 9-year change and then again with puberty. Some of the other subject areas that you're going to have for the 3rd grade year, the 9-year-old child, are music and handwork and foreign language, and those will continue to build upon what was previously done. But in grade 3, you're looking at a new approach because the child has gone through that 9-year change. So foreign language and music are going to be approached a little bit differently than they were approached before. And in handwork, you're going to continue with new skills. And what I found with handwork, especially between grades 1 and 8, is that a lot of skills were taught, but at a very basic level, that are all going to be revisited in the high school years at a more intense level. So whereas projects might be a little bit on the smaller scale, like weaving a small piece of fabric or maybe a small pouch, they're going to get more intense and more complicated as the children get older and into high school. I hope this was helpful in understanding what's going on with your 9-year-old child, especially this pivotal 9-year change. I hope you'll check out some of the other videos in this series. You can find those links in the description box below. And I encourage you to check out the 3rd grade 9-year-old post on my website at Pepper and Pine, because there's going to be more information on some of the issues and topics and subject areas that were not addressed in this video. So I highly encourage you to check out that blog post. You can find the link to that blog post in the description box below. And if you'd like to see how we're homeschooling on a daily basis, I encourage you to check me out on my website at pepperandpine.com.